a compassionate preacher who organized an orphanage for children of fallen soldiers. A large stone angel was kneeling behind the monument, resting her head and arms on top of his stone and weeping. As I stared at it, I found myself blinking back a lot. Allergies probably, but I was thinking about God and the angels, weeping over the orphans and the widows of war, and mourning the loss of fresh young men and women who forfeited their future to give us one. My chest felt heavy. On Memorial Day, there are many ways to remember our fallen heroes. Our neighbor, a veteran, puts a small American flag on every yard in our subdivision. We fly our big flag on the front porch, go through old photo albums with my children and grandchildren, telling them stories of my Uncle Jimmy and John, who fought in World War II. Then we drove down to take in the parade. But sometimes I just sit on the front porch steps under the flag and blink a lot. Lord, these tears are for those who speak to me, even though they're dead. Well, good morning again. First of all, I want to start off with announcements. There's nothing wrong with me. I shaved my head to support the Baldrick's research for cancer to raise money. And Manchester Elementary School raised $21,000 2 weeks ago. So, and I know the Lord's going to bring my hair back, so. So you don't have to ask me, are you okay? Barbara was even wonderful. She served some hats with me. Okay, so announcements. There's many in here. Let's start with Tuesday. The Pastoral Relationship Committee is meeting at Carol Latuga's. We're also having the book study. I think, is it the first chapter we're reading? And anybody can come along, we're just starting. Please, it's wonderful. We're learning about the armor of God. And boy, do I have to put it on with things that I need to overcome. Let's see, then the next one. Oh, diaconate meeting. It's 10 o'clock this Wednesday. Oh, the prayer meeting, I'm sorry, back up, I'm sorry, is going to be at the parsonage at 7 o'clock. Choir rehearsal at 7 o'clock on Thursday. The youth are having a music night on Friday, and the men's focus, we're canceling it. I talked with Jim, so then the upcoming things, I guess in 2 weeks, wear some red for Pentecost. And then there's Father's Day breakfast is about 3 weeks at 8:30. Then on the back, summer camp, if anybody still would like to go to Camp Senecal. You'll also get Maurice Johnson's address and where he is still in Boston. And he has his birthday coming up on June 1st, so maybe we could flood him with some cards. And I also have one extra one that's not even in the bulletin. This is for Daryl Davis, who died a couple of months ago in a car accident. She's very much helpful with the foster care. And on Thursday, May 30th at 5:30 at the West Mountain Inn, there'll be a dinner and silent auction to support Daryl's son, Beth Davis, and the Vermont Foster and Adoptive Parents Association. The cost is $25. Bring an item for the silent auction. And it says, join us for an evening of remembrance of the amazing and gracious life of Daryl Davis. Hearken to the back early days of powerful Arlington Women's Pajama Party night, where Daryl was such a key participant. Sounds like they had fun. Women from all the years of her life are being invited to share an evening at the inn to remember Daryl and support the organization that was so close to her heart. Gathering at 5:30 and the buffet dinner at 6:30. Bring your memories to share. There's an RSVP to Annie at westmountainin.com, or you could call the West Mountain Inn, 802-375-6513, but you could look up in the telephone book too. I think that's it on announcements. We covered everything. And now we're going to do the call to worship, which is on the Blue Book, 746, Psalm 90. You have been our dwelling place in all generations.
Before the mountains were brought forth, or ever you had formed the earth and the world, from everlasting to everlasting, you are God.
You turned us back to dust and said, turn back, you mortals.
For 1,000 years in your sight are like yesterday when it is past, or like a watch in the night.
You sweep them away, they are like a dream, like grass that is renewed in the morning.
In the morning it flourishes and is renewed, in the evening it fades and withers.
Turn, O Lord, how long?
Have compassion on your servants.
Satisfy us in the morning with your steadfast love, so that we may rejoice and be glad in all days.
Make us glad as many days as you have with us, and as many years as we have seen you.
Let your work be manifest to your servant, and let your glorious power to their children.
Let the favor of the Lord our God be upon us, and prosper for us the work of our hands. O prosper the work of our hands.
And now if we turn to 33 in the Blue Book, and this song will be How Great Thou Art, and stand please.
Consider all the works I have
we're going to be doing a song during the offering. Once the offering is collected, the ushers, you can just bring the offering right back up to the table, and then we'll be in the middle of the song, and everyone can stand at that time. And then after that, we're going to be doing another song. So.
Say
When I survey the wondrous cross on which the Prince of Glory died, my richest gain I count but loss, and for
offering that we had. Dear Lord Jesus, we thank you wholeheartedly for the gifts you have bestowed on us. Here are our offerings for your greatness to continue in this wonderful world that we live in to share with others. In Jesus' name, amen.
Well, this morning our theme is about giving one's life. We are created to be fulfilled by embracing our connection to something that's greater than ourselves. And Memorial Day is a time we set aside each year to remember the many people who lost their lives for the cause of freedom. In our passage this morning, Jesus will share some of his thoughts about giving his life to free all of humanity from the grip of Satan. His death opened the door for everyone to follow him and step into the light of a spiritual, physical, emotional, and eternal freedom. Is that what our eyes are focused on? If so, are we willing to follow Jesus even if the path through that door causes us to give up our life as we know it? John 12:20-36.
This is from the New International Version. Now there are some Greeks among those who went up to worship at the festival. They came to Philip, who was from Bethsaida in Galilee, with a request. "Sir," they said, "we would like to see Jesus." Philip went to tell Andrew. Andrew and Philip in turn told Jesus. Jesus replied, "The hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. Very truly I tell you, unless a kernel of wheat falls on the ground and dies, it remains only as a single seed. But if it dies, it produces many seeds. And anyone who loves their life will lose it, while anyone who hates their life in this world will keep it for eternal life. Whoever serves me must follow me, and where I am, my servant also will be. My Father will honor you, the one who serves me. Now my soul is troubled, and what shall I say? Father, save me for this hour. No, it is for this very reason I came to this hour. Father, glorify your name." Then a voice from heaven, "I have glorified it, and I will glorify it again." The crowd that was there and heard it said it had thunder. Others said an angel had spoken to him. Jesus said, "This voice was for your benefit, not mine. Now is the time for judgment of this world. Now the prince of this world will be driven out. And then I am lifted up from heaven, will draw all people to myself." He said this to show the kind of death he was going to die. The crowd spoke up. "You have heard from the law that the Messiah will remain forever. So how can you say, the Son of Man must be lifted up? Who is this Son of Man?" Then Jesus told them, "You are going to have the light just a little while longer. Walk a while and have the light before the darkness overtakes you. Whoever walks in the dark does not know where they are going. Believe in the light while you have the light, so that you may become children of light." When he had finished speaking, Jesus left and hid himself from them.
Thank you, Lynna. Well, we're going through different conversations in the book of John, and this conversation is between Jesus and the people who have gathered to accompany him into Jerusalem on his final journey to the Passover. You remember we celebrated this day when it was Palm Sunday. Jesus was riding on a donkey, and the people were waving palm branches because they believed that Jesus was the Messiah that they had been waiting for. Well, there were people from all over, even some from other countries, to celebrate the Passover. And in this passage, they're called Greeks. They're Gentiles who spoke the Greek language, which was the main language of the Roman Empire. They were probably searching for God, and that search had drawn them to the Jewish faith. The Jews would call them God-fearers. And they knew about the prophecies of the Messiah coming too, and they wanted to meet Jesus. It must have been hard to get close to Jesus that day because he was surrounded by this crowd with the palm branches and everything. So the Gentile people, they spoke to Philip saying, "Sir, we would like to see Jesus." Philip and Andrew were both from the town of Bethsaida, which was a major trading hub in the ancient times. And both of them had Greek names. So it's possible that the Greek people were feeling an affinity to them and that they could communicate their desire to them and that they would pass it on to Jesus. This part of the story, I think, is a good reminder for us that there are people out there in our community, around us, who are looking for God too. They might strike up a conversation with us because they have something in common with us. Are we ready to point them to Jesus? Or do we assume that we're the only ones who are interested in having a relationship with him? Well, Philip and Andrew are faithful to bring the message from the Gentiles to Jesus. And Jesus knew that the Gentiles seeking him was the sign that his hour had come. It was time for him to give his life for the salvation and freedom of all humanity. Jesus responded to Philip and Andrew with a message for the Gentile people in verse 26. I'm going to read from the Living Bible. "If these Greeks want to be my disciples, tell them to come and follow me, for my servants must be where I am, and if they follow me, the Father will honor them." Well, they had asked to see him, but were they ready to follow him? What would that mean for them? They would need to give up the plans that they had made, where they were going to stay, who they would be with. They would be doing what Jesus was doing, which meant serving God's purposes right alongside of him. Jesus promises that the Father, God, would honor them if they followed Jesus. But was being with Jesus and having him share the Father's honor with them enough motivation to leave behind all the worldly sources of honor? It's a big decision. Well, we're Gentiles too, unless there are any Jews among us that I'm not aware of. So are we willing to follow Jesus in the kind of life that surrenders our own plans and is responsive to God's purpose? Before we answer that question, let's take a closer look at what is involved in living a life like Jesus did. First of all, he talks about letting go of life to find it. I want to read this portion from the Message, verses 24 to 25. Jesus said, "Listen carefully. Unless a grain of wheat is buried in the ground, dead to the world, it is never more than a grain of wheat. But if it is buried, it sprouts and reproduces itself many times over. In the same way, anyone who holds on to life just as it is destroys that life. But if you let it go, reckless in your love, you'll have it forever, real and eternal." It's hard for us to open our hands and let go of life as we know it. It may be small, but we're a little comfortable with that smallness. We feel like if it's small, maybe we'll have a better chance of being in control of our own little kingdom. Our routines, our favorite things surround us, encase us in a life that seems kind of self-contained. But Jesus is asking us to see our lives like a seed. How many of you got little seed packages and maybe put them in the ground or have plans to do that this weekend? Anyone out there? Yeah, one person, a few more. So, can you imagine if the seeds in this packet had feelings and thoughts, they were sentient beings, and they could speak to you about this whole process? So, would they be afraid if I ripped open the package because I was going to bury them in the dark earth? If they were afraid, they might try to convince me, this is a very pretty package. I think that you should put it on the shelf and just look at it and have it be a decoration in your home. Wouldn't that be so much better? Or maybe the seeds are excited that you chose them to be a part of your garden. And so they might be glad it's time to come out of their tiny package and out into the earth to fulfill their potential. Or maybe they're, sort of a mixture of excitement and anxiety because they know if they're planted that they will grow into a whole new plant, but they will have to be split open and transformed. If so, they might ask you, is it going to be painful? How long will it take? Is it worth the sacrifice? If your life is like a seed, which scenario do you feel an affinity towards as approaching dying to bring new life? Are you scared? Are you excited? A little bit of both? We're called to lay down our lives as we know them and embrace being part of a bigger, deeper, more connected life, like a wheat field. At various times in life, we are called to small deaths, and then at its conclusion as well, we are called to die and be reborn. So I'd like to share with you an example of each. The first one is a story that came across an International Ministries little newsletter. It's about Bill and Ann Clemmer, and they serve in Goma, which is in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And their ministry was highlighted in here with an article that was called, "When Jesus Returns, We Want to Be in the Trenches." Bill shares his story about being called to serve as a missionary doctor in Africa. He was just 22. He was there with the Peace Corps, and he wanted to be he was excited about being connected to something bigger than himself, the movement of peace in the world. So when he went back to the United States, he pursued that goal. He needed to go to medical school. He had to have residency years. And so 7 years later, he finished that, but he had also gotten married, had children, gone into private practice to pay some school debt, and purchased a house. The American dream, right? So now what? He figured, well, Lord, don't you want me to be responsible and save for my children's college? And, this doesn't necessarily make sense to go back to Africa. But then he had an experience not far from here. He wrote, "My wife, Ann, and I were traveling in upstate Vermont when quite unexpectedly our train stopped dead in its tracks. In the isolation of the moment, God led us to pray about the calling I had heard years earlier. And by the time that train started to move again, we had told God, yes, we will go." 6 months later, with another child on the way, they were in the Democratic Republic of Congo, serving in a very conflict-ridden area. They're still there. They're in their 60s now. But they still feel called to minister to those with medical and spiritual needs amidst the Ebola epidemic. Bill and Ann resisted the temptation to have a comfortable, small, ordinary life, to kind of stay on the shelf a little bit. And instead they have followed Jesus and let their life seeds be planted and multiplied for God's kingdom purposes of wholeness and peace in the world. It was a small death to the American dream, but it is reaping great results in God's harvest. Maybe you aren't going to be a missionary to Africa, but have you lost someone close to you that you love? Belden Lane, in his book called The Solace of Fierce Landscapes, wrote about the small deaths that each of us come to throughout life. he shares a prayer originally from St. Ignatius Loyal, which asks God, "On each of my dyings, shed your light and your love." Belden saw this as he spent time with his mother, who had terminal cancer and dementia. She lived 2.5 years longer than the doctors thought she would. And he wrote about her journey inward, saying, "A cloud that distanced her from me also opened her up to something I couldn't see, something she clearly recognized as grand. 3 years into the experience of my mother's dying, I finally began to realize how much the process of letting go was also one of being loved. All the griefs of God serve love." Her dying was a letting go, an indifference to the roller coaster of thoughts and emotions that she had ridden most of her life. It was a dying for Belden, too, to watch his mom slip away from him so slowly. But they were both able to experience God's love in a deeper, more encompassing way. Because God does not call us to walk alone through the valley of the shadow of death. Jesus was feeling that shadow as the griefs approached him. He felt sorrow. He felt grief. It seized him just like it does us. But his Father was there with him and even spoke in an audible voice that everyone heard, even if they didn't know exactly what they were hearing. Together, Jesus and God, his Father, focused on the purpose for him laying down his life. And remembering our purpose can help us when we're going through difficult times. Jesus said in verses 27 and 28, "Now my soul is deeply troubled. Shall I pray, 'Father, save me from what lies ahead'? But that is the very reason I came. Father, bring glory to your name." And then a voice from heaven said, "I have already done this, and I will do it again." In that moment when grief feels overwhelming, it helps us to remember that suffering has meaning. It has purpose, because God is shaping us and the whole of human history towards glory. Christ left the perfection of love and light in heaven to come to earth so that we could see his glory, the glory of the one and only, full of grace and truth, who came from the Father. He came to show us the glory of grace and truth and share it with us through his death, through his resurrection. Jesus knew that being lifted up on a cross, even though it was intended to humiliate him, would actually be the way that all people would draw closer to him. That's why we have crosses here. An invitation, a remembrance to draw close to Christ and to learn in him that death is not the end of life. Greater life follows death. And this is possible because of what he did on that cross. Jesus defeated Satan. Satan, the one who delights in filling the world and our minds with lies. The one who tries to keep people tied up in distractions and hopelessness. Our lives do have purpose. And when we are reminded of that purpose, we have reason to hope. God is here, right with you. Even when you can't sense his presence, he is speaking. He might even be singing over your life. In one of the posts my friend shared from Ann Voskamp's blog, a person I had never heard of before named Aubrey Sampson was sharing about the louder song. Where is God in the suffering? Aubrey struggles with a chronic illness that all of her bones ache. Her son has developmental issues and surgeries, and she's dealing with the death of her cousin while hiking on top of all of that. Her grief counselor suggested that she think of the suffering as an invitation, but it was not an invitation she wanted to accept. However, she did accept an invitation to a night out with a friend. They went to a theater in the Round in Chicago, and I want to read an excerpt of what she wrote about. If you want to close your eyes and imagine it, you're welcome to do that. We grab our seats just as the lights dim and a large projector screen descends from the ceiling. Choir members, clothed in all black, walk onto the stage and start to sing a slow, sad, ancient funeral dirge. Meanwhile, the screen flashes through a series of raw images: a starving mother and baby, a child soldier, lands ravaged by famine, a funeral, and other visual depictions of pain and poverty and corruption. Why did we come here tonight, I think? This is a mistake. What my friend and I don't realize is that while we're watching this depressing performance in front of us, a second choir has silently filled the room and surrounded our entire audience. They raised their voices and began to sing over us, a classic U2 refrain. I still haven't found what I'm looking for. I realize that I've been looking for God to show up, and he hasn't. Or if he has, I can't seem to find him. Why didn't he protect my cousin, my son, me? Lost in my thoughts, I don't realize that something about the concert in front of me is shifting. Somehow, the second song begins to overpower the suffering song in front of us. Our focus has moved from one song to the other, and the choir director invites all of us to sing along. I believe in the kingdom come. You broke the bonds, you loosed the chains, you carried the cross of my shame. And from somewhere deep within, I remember that this is what God does. In a world full of hate and abuse, God doesn't avoid or ignore pain. He sings a louder song over it. And he invites his hurting people to sing with him. The media flashes images to us too, doesn't it? Even if we don't tune in, suffering has a way of finding us, reaching us. But we can remember that Christ suffered with us and for us so that we would have eternal freedom to be with him. We can listen for God's voice surrounding us in our suffering, giving us a reason to hope. We don't have to pretend that the darkness is not there, but we can look for a light in the darkness. Verse 35 and 36, Jesus told them, you're going to have the light with you just a little while longer. Walk while you have the light, before darkness overtakes you. Whoever walks in the dark does not know where they are going. Believe in the light while you have the light, so that you may become children of the light. He was talking about the light of truth. He embodied it, and he shared it with them. They weren't going to have him with them in the same way that they had when he dies. So it's time now for them to believe so that they can bear the light after he is gone. And that's our invitation too. Have you ever thought of yourself as a bearer of Christ's light? Have you ever heard of the phrase, 1,000 points of light? It's something that the first President Bush said in his inaugural speech and brought up kind of throughout his term as president. It's an inspirational idea, isn't it? To reflect the truth and love of God when we serve a purpose greater than ourselves. The phrase actually first appeared in a children's story. C.S. Lewis's book, The Magician's Nephew. He was describing the appearance of stars in the previously dark sky of Narnia as the world was being created as 1,000 points of light. The stars were singing, and it was the first voice, the deep one, which had made them appear and sing. We are part of something greater than ourselves, whether we realize it or not. But fully engaging in our part of God's story will call us to give up the life as we know it. And if we do, we will find our true purpose, our hope, our song, our light in the darkness. And we won't have to be afraid anymore. Will you pray with me? Dear God, thank you for showing us so vividly through Christ that we do not need to fear deaths, the ones that come along the way of our life when change happens and we feel grief, and the one at the end of our life. We don't need to fear that either, because you are holiness and love. You are singing over us, and you will not let us go. Please, God, give us the courage to live lives where we are broken open, invested in your kingdom. We will find our joy in being part of your work in the world, your work of peace and wholeness. May it begin in us. May it spread. We know that this is the trajectory of history, and Lord, we ask you to bring it to fulfillment. In Jesus' name, amen.
We have one more song today. I ask that you join us once again. Standing Curator.
Christ is my reward and all my devotion. Now there's nothing in this world that could ever satisfy. Through every trial, my soul will sing. No turning back, I've been set free, and Christ is enough for me. Christ is enough for me. Everything I need is in you. Everything before me, the world behind me. No turning back, no turning back. The cross before me, the world behind me. No turning back, no turning back. In Christ is enough for me. Christ is enough for me. Everything I need is in you. Everything I need, and I have decided to follow Jesus. No turning back, no turning back. And I have decided to follow Jesus. No turning back, no turning back. The cross before me, the world behind me. No turning back, no turning back. The cross before me, the world behind me. No turning back, no turning back. No turning back, no turning back. No turning back, no turning back.
In just a moment, we'll have a time of fellowship and refreshments just through this door in the vestry. I hope that you can all stay and connect with one another and share how you're doing. But before we go anywhere, please receive the benediction. This is from 2 Thessalonians 2:16 and 17. Now may our Lord Jesus Christ himself and God our Father, who loved us by his grace and gave us eternal encouragement and good hope, encourage your hearts and strengthen you in every good deed and word. Amen.